Welcome back. That was a reconstruction of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. So this is part 2 on the video series on the Aztecs and the Incas. And the big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are, first, how are the Aztecs and Incas similar politically and economically, and how are they different? And then, what cultural traditions do the Aztecs and Incas continue, and how do these traditions change with the arrival of the Spanish? So how are the Aztecs and Incas similar politically and economically, and how are they different? So in terms of their political characteristics, the Aztecs and Incas, like many empires before them in other parts of Afro-Eurasia, were ruled by a powerful central leader that received authority and the right to rule from the gods, the divine right to rule. Some names of some leaders you should just be familiar with. Montezuma, who was the last Aztec ruler at the time that the Spanish conquered the Aztecs. Pachacuti, the great Incan leader who unified the Incan Empire and also built Machu Picchu.
Gangsta party. A party. Ain't nothing but a gangsta party. Party.
And then my personal favorite, Tupac. Tupac Shakur's mom apparently was very much into history and named Tupac after this great Incan king. So the Aztecs, in terms of their political characteristics, they conquered these neighboring tribes around them and expanded their empire through military conquest, but then they forced those various tribes to pay tribute to them. And the net effect of this was that those tribes also then were not incredibly loyal to the Aztecs, and so oftentimes this resulted in enemies, and we're going to see this as being one of the explanations for why the Spanish were able to so quickly defeat the Aztecs with very few conquistadors of their own. So what is tribute? So tribute is payment made by one state to the ruler of a more dominant state. We saw this kind of political structure in the Mongol Empire and the way in which they ruled Russia and those Russian principalities, where those princes were basically forced into making tribute payments to the Mongols in return for the Mongols not destroying them. In contrast to this form, a tributary form of political rule, the Incas are going to build a far more traditional empire with a more elaborate bureaucracy and more traditional unity. And we're going to see this, for instance, in the construction of this major road system that we described that was utilized to connect the Incan Empire across nearly all of the western portion of South America. Now, in terms of their economic characteristics, the Inca also required their citizens to engage in mandatory public labor, and this type of system is known as corvée labor. We talked about it previously when describing how the Chinese built the Great Wall of China and the Grand Canal. But when it comes to the Incas, there's a special name for their form of corvée labor, which is the mita system. So it's through this mita system that the Incas were able to build this incredible system of roads across the Andes Mountains. And they were able to also provide enough food and develop some of the various other agricultural techniques that they develop, like the terrace farming system. Now, in terms of the cultural traditions, what cultural traditions of the Aztecs and Incas continued, and how did these cultural traditions change with the arrival of the Spanish? So the Aztecs and Incas were both polytheists. They worshiped multiple gods, and those gods were in control over various forces in nature. So the Aztecs worshiped various gods, such as Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli. Now, these Aztec gods very much demanded blood. We can see this in this image of Huitzilopochtli sitting on top of this Aztec pyramid, which is covered with blood. This is evidence of the various practices of human sacrifice that the Aztecs participated in, oftentimes against prisoners of war. So these massive pyramids were built by the Aztecs, like this one at Tenochtitlan in modern Mexico City. And here's what they look like today. So as a result of the destruction of Aztec temples by the Spanish conquistadors. Now the Aztecs are going to continue many of the cultural practices of the Maya and the Olmec. such as the traditional Mesoamerican ball game, the idea of constructing and building pyramids and monumental architecture, that's the central part of their religion, and then finally that practice of bloodletting and ritual sacrifice, which was first developed by the Olmec and later continued by the Maya. So we can see a lot of these traditional cultural practices that are going to be continued throughout Latin American history until ultimately the arrival of the Spanish. Now, the Inca, in contrast to the Aztecs, are going to rely on the one large domesticated animal that they have, which is the llama, and they're going to use that animal for meat and wool and for other purposes. Now, the Incas also are going to develop a very unique form of record keeping known as a quipu, and this was actually first developed back with Chavin, and then later societies of the Andes Mountains are going to continue to improve upon this technique, but this knotted string device known as quipus was really the only system of writing or record keeping that was maintained by the Incan people. So we have the Aztec here in modern day Mexico, and we have the Inca down here in South America. And ultimately, the Spanish are going to arrive, starting with Christopher Columbus on these islands in the Caribbean in 1492. And the Aztecs and Incas are the major civilization at the time of Spanish colonization. And that's why we spend so much time on them compared to other major civilizations and empires of Latin America. And so the Spanish conquistadors like Cortez and Pizarro are going to decimate and conquer, mainly because they have three distinct advantages, as Jared Diamond describes them: guns, germs, and steel. So the Spanish are going to impose many of their cultural traditions, which is going to be a major change in the religious traditions of Latin America as we move into the 16th century. The Spanish missionaries are going to come over and convert significant portions of the native population. So at the same time, many of the native peoples are going to retain some of these cultural traditions, and we're going to see basically a syncretic religious tradition in Latin American form, with Christianity becoming the dominant religion, but Christianity practiced kind of through the lens of many of these localized customs and practices. So the big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are: first, how were the Aztecs and Incas similar politically and economically, and how are they different? And then what cultural traditions did the Aztecs and Inca continue? And then how did these traditions change with the arrival of the Spanish? Thanks for watching.